previously in episode 0, it was incredibly important for me, particularly doing a project like this, to start with those who had impacted my life, to be able to have these critical conversations, but also to thank them for their impact in my life. Give them their proverbial flowers when they can still smell them.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Boosie Teaches podcast. As we say here at Boosie Teaches, in a galaxy of learners, Boosie Teaches lights the way. As our host Tanya Busico says to her students, come on in, relax, we'll be here a while. Let's get started.
I hope you enjoyed episode 0. If you hadn't had a chance to check that out, please be sure to check that out. Now we are at episode 1, which I believe I shared in in episode 0, that we taped our episode April 2021. This episode 1, welcome, is called Introspective Dreaming with the Reverend Dr. John Kinney. I hope you enjoy.
Hey everyone, I'm Tanya Busico. I teach writing and communication and a few other skills to first-year college students. Welcome to the Boosie Teaches podcast. As I tell my students, come on in, relax. We'll be here a while. Let's get started. So this first season is about mentors and influential people in my life. People that I'm certain others should know their story too. While they are the most successful people I know, they are also the most generous. Today we have none other than the Reverend Dr. John Kinney, a titan in Black theology, one of the most distinguished theologians of our time, gifted preacher and professor. Dr. Kinney is the professor of theology and director of the Center for African American Pentecostalism and Leadership Development at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology and pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Beaver Dam, Virginia. He has been pastor for over 3 decades. He's also the former dean, which is how I met him, at the School of Theology. He served in that capacity for over 3 decades. He earned his undergraduate and graduate degrees from Marshall University and Virginia Union, respectively. He was also awarded the PhD from Columbia University / Union Theological Seminary in New York, and he has taught all over the country and in Africa. So let me tell you a little bit about how I met Dean Kinney at the time. So, and I don't even know if you remember this, Dr. Kinney, but it was April 2010, and I came to seminary with Dr. Joanne Braxton, and she was taking Systematic 2. And I'll never forget that because I was 23 at the time, and I knew that there was a call on my life, but I wasn't sure what that meant. And I knew that I still wanted to hang out with my friends. I was like, God, you calling me to ministry? I still want to hang out. And I will never forget in that class, you talked, 2 things, but you talked about how you counseled your young people at your church and how, well, my interpretation at the time was you could still be a Christian and live for God and hang out with your friends. Like that does not disrupt your walk per se. And then the other thing you talked about was why people went into ministry and how sometimes people come into ministry not necessarily to answer a call, but to kind of make things right in their life. And it's almost out of guilt. And that really struck me because I knew at the time that I didn't feel guilty about anything, but I knew that God called me to do something. And I was like, oh, this is confirmation. And then fast forward a few months later. So in April, I applied to the school. And so 4 months later, I heard back from Dr. Martin, who was director of admissions at the time in August. And I remember she asked me if I was still interested. At the time, I was working my first full-time job. I had finishing up William & Mary. And I remember she set up a phone call with us. And I was calling, we were actually talking out. I was like in a break room in the building that I worked in downtown Norfolk. And I remember telling you that I was not called to be a preacher. I was like, I know that I have a call in my life. I don't know what it is. And I remember you telling me that you never know where the call will take you and that I could still be an artist and preach. And that you said, come on to Richmond. I was like, I don't know. I don't have a job. I was working down here in Norfolk. And I remember coming to Richmond and just answering the call, and it changed my life. But let's get started in our conversation. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. I'm amazed. I just had a birthday yesterday
Happy belated birthday.
that takes me into the middle decade before I step into 8 decades in life. And in some ways, it is a period of radical discovery rather than a moment of decline in terms of my mind. Necessarily, my body is feeling some of those aches and pains that come with the aging process, particularly when you recognize how you battered your body playing football. uh, but but there's a way in which, Tanya, that I have become a deep seeker. Rather than living with a desire to prove I'm right, I live with a simple desire to try to be faithful every day. And the other aspect it is that my walk has caused me to recognize the closer you get the truth, the more the truth reveals how far away you are. That you don't come to truth with a sense of arrogance, righteousness, and holiness, but you enter this truth almost confessionally, saying, I celebrate the journey, I commit to the journey, but every moment of the journey compels you to be more of a seeker rather than to reach the point of perceived or claimed expertise. And I've discovered a great joy in that. What age does is free you to take risk. And some people won't understand it, but guess what? You reach a point, and I don't want to use language like this, that you aren't really living to receive affirmation and to please. You're living to be faithful to what you've been called to do and to be generous in releasing what God has given you. And so often that what God gives you will place you in a place where you either feel isolated, rejected, or threatened.
Right.
But the truth is, there's also a great sense of connection, communion, and peace.
Thank you. So let's talk, because this podcast is about being a student and teaching. So what kind of student were you, either in secondary school, college, or both?
I would have to answer that with a kind of an answer that would suggest ranges of understanding. I was a good student in terms I was fascinated by learning. I enjoyed the classroom, but I enjoyed so much more than the classroom. So I always had like competing loyalties to the extent that my ability and capacity enabled me to do well sometimes when I was not doing the best that I could do. But I do think in some ways, in the midst of all of that, I was living my best life, because what I mean by that, I was in the sports, I was experiencing all of the dimensions of youthful development, still attending to study. But one of the things I loved about studying was almost asking the questions that you weren't supposed to ask. Whether it was in the church or the classroom, I always say, but wait a minute, why? Or why can't you? What if we just flip this? Or could we look at this way? And why do we come to that you say that's the logical conclusion? We could take another approach, and this could be the conclusion. And I began to recognize at certain points I was being tutored to regurgitate, not to investigate, imagine, and dream. And I soon learned at a certain point it was necessary to master a body of material, and I did it. but that's not what excited me. It's not what inspired me. It's not what drew me even to want to spend my life involved in education. So in a very real sense, I would say I was a good student, but a diverse student. And I'm being very transparent now. The fact that I had multiple interests sometimes put me into the position that I was scurrying to be productive in the classroom.
Right.
And if I get what I'm saying is that sometimes I would have all these things be enjoyed, and all of a sudden realize, man, you got to have that paper in tomorrow. You got to do this. You got to do that.
Right.
And it's like,
Right.
and I would rush. But one of the things that how that's affected my life even now, I have the capacity to work on so many things at the same time now and learn how to conflate assignments so that 3 or 4 assignments have the kind of the same center, and I'm working on 4 assignments, but I actually have identified a core of either question or investigation. Allows me to work on all these things all the time, and I have lived with the ability. You don't have to give me long range notice. You say, okay, this happened. This fell through, that fell through. Okay, can you give me an hour and I'll have something for you? Can you do this? And I'm willing to step in. But the other thing I've discovered about that is that really, for me, it's about living. Part of the creativity grows out of living with generosity. That is, always be willing to give yourself for the sake of causes and community. So stuff is thrust on you,
Right.
But you always find a way where you were taught to always say no. Just tell them no. Is I've always lived to say, okay, let me see how I can help you. So,
right.
And a part of that, I think, is a part even about my educational experience, that I put myself in that position by the way I went about it. When I got into higher levels of the academy, like working on my PhD, there were times that I would spend 12 hours a day, focused on an issue or a topic and researching. And I already had a family and a wife, and sometimes they would have to help me recover my balance.
That moves me to my next question, because there's always this debate, HBCU, PWI, diverse schools. And my next question is, how did you navigate going from Virginia Union, really from Marshall University, Virginia Union, to then Columbia and Ivy League? What resources or support did you have? Really, how did you navigate that transition?
Yeah, and it can be difficult. When I was at Marshall University, we had when you look at African American population, it was relatively small.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is you're talking about 1965 in West Virginia. Okay.
Ooh, yeah.
And you realize part of my elementary, middle school, I was in all Black schools. And then in late middle and high school, I went to a fully integrated school. One of my blessings was that I was an athlete. And that immediately opened doors for you, and things of that nature. You developed a concept of inclusion in terms of being part of a team. And even though all my coaches at that point were white, many of the gifts on the team were Black. They were my buddies, and the coaches were real advocates for us. But coming to Virginia Union, when I acknowledge the call to ministry, my story is not like many who talk about, I started preaching when I was a child. I grew up in the church, but I was not baptized until I was a junior in college. With a matter of months after acknowledging my commitment to the life of faith, I was before the church acknowledging a call to ministry. Well, the pastor of that church, the Reverend Charles H. Smith, who has been a lifetime conversation partner, and both a mentor and teacher in the early stages, he said, "I want you to go to Virginia Union." I never heard of Virginia Union. And then he said, "That's where I went to seminary." And he said, "There's certain things that you're going to get there that you will not get anywhere else." And so I, you know, left Marshall, came to Virginia Union, and I found his statements to be prophetic. And the things that I learned, what it was to be able to step into a learning environment where everything you were learning was correlated to the Black experience. Now, it doesn't mean that every source was from the Black experience, but every source you encountered, it was you encountered it as a way to speak to the reality of the Black experience. And it was there I developed some lifelong friendships and connections. And in some ways, it anchored me because it began to give focus to my thinking. And some of that thinking was very scattered, but I always had to bring it back to a context. In a very real sense, it contextualized and particularized my thinking and gave a purpose to my thinking.
Okay.
So I was always wrestling, okay, how does this relate? What does this say? Wow, how does this speak to this? You know what? Great day. Look at what this scholar just said.
Right.
So, I would read something by someone who's considered a white neo-reformed theologian. And of course, at that time, you got to realize there was Barth, Tillich, and Niebuhr and Bonhoeffer.
Right.
James Cotton's first book came out while I was in seminary. One of the books I read in seminary. Okay, his first book. But already I was starting to say, wait a minute, to read something in Tillich to say that ecstasy is not irrational. It is rationality carried to another degree of consciousness. He doesn't have a clue about what that meant for me engaging some of the things that were being said about Black religion and how it was for the ignorant and it was for this. And I say, wait a minute. Oh, he didn't mean it for this, but what he just spoke, I can appropriate in a fashion, talk about how we have misunderstood spirituality and religiosity and have established a hierarchy of value based upon the absence or presence of emotion and bodily expression. Okay. These are the type of things I'm really in my mind and I'm seeing these type of things. And of course I would begin to put it in my paper. So when I went to Columbia Union Theological Seminary, there was already something in my soul. Right.
Okay.
And I got to admit, when I went there, I wanted to prove that I was as good as everybody else.
Yeah, I can identify with that.
Ivy League school.
Right.
And in my proving that I was good as everybody else, sometimes I had to violate what was really going on in me to demonstrate that I was fully capable.
Right.
You understand? And so that meant, writing things and doing things that weren't really a part of my soul until I got at the upper levels and the dissertation level. And that's one thing because Dr. Cone was there. One of the things that he blessed me with that I'll always thank God for him as a mentor, he would, I would write something and he would say, guess what? This will get you an A and it will get you a job, but it will not get what you have to offer to us.
Wow.
Do you understand?
Oh, wow.
He said, there's more in you.
Mm,
And I don't ever want you to settle for the job. I want you to work to offer us the more.
wow.
And that it came back to me. It was a strange mix because can I share with you a story?
Absolutely. That's what we're here for. It's a podcast.
When I was defending my dissertation,
Mm-hmm.
you got to realize I left school ABD and was doing some final writing and editing, but I had come back to Virginia Union to teach. In my mind, when I went to the defense of my dissertation,
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was a colleague. I thought, and I began uh, to demonstrate, one of the professors from another department at Columbia asked me a question, and I felt the question was not appropriate for what I was writing about because he asked me a question about the market value of the property that Abyssinia Baptist Church sold in Times Square before they moved to the Harlem district. And I kind of bristled and I said, well, what does that have to do? And Dr. Cone kicked me under the table and he knocked me. And then he just put his head down and said, afterwards, we went to lunch. And he said, John, in that setting, your desire is to get to the degree, not to get into an argument.
Right.
And the reason I kicked you was you were acting like you were one of the people at the table rather than someone who was trying to get the right to be at the table. Wow. You understand? Mm-hmm. And so I think the doctoral process in some ways has changed, at least my experience working with students, multiple students from around the country. I hope it has changed. But then, you had to step into that room as a compliant, if I could say this, subservient individual, prepared to demonstrate to them that you recognized how to affirm their authority.
Wow.
And it was interestingly because after the defense, I passed the defense, but there were a list of revisions. And what I did, everything that they said in that defense, I wrote down their comment, and then in the revisions in my dissertation, wrote my response to their comment, everything from adding a footnote to that, and it passed with flying colors. I don't look back on that now as so much negative. It really was part of the discipline of the process. But here's my concern. When you're in the process, you would swear, I will never do to anybody else what they did to me. But as soon as you're in position, you do the same thing to somebody else. And I still to this day see people who actually believe that the educational process ought to create pain and suffering. It almost ought to break you down rather than give you levels of joy and excitement. And so I understand the process, but as you well know, because we have shared together in a learning context, that's not the way I go about what I do. That there ought to be a sense of joy, and that every student ought to feel, with all the differences and different ability, all of them ought to feel a sense of intrinsic worth and value in this classroom and in this learning experience. And that's what I've always tried to cultivate it, not only as a teacher, but also as a leader of an institution.
Right. This makes me think of, two things I didn't know. So was Dr. James Cone the chair of your committee?
No.
Okay.
I can't, because see, I was in the joint program with Columbia and Union Theological Seminary.
Okay.
So that means I had people on my committee from Columbia and Union Theological Seminary.
Okay.
And the way it was set up, it was required that you have people from the discipline you were in. So, I was in religion.
Right.
And so there were people from the Department of Religion at Columbia, but you also had to have university-wide people who sat on your committee and read it. And then you had people who read it. Believe it or not, the supervisor of my PhD program was Robert Handy. Robert Handy was not a theologian. He taught church history.
Oh, wow.
Now, but this is an interesting thing. James Cone was my advisor.
Oh.
All right. But the person that I had to submit my dissertation to for final approval with appropriate edits and changes was not James Cone.
Wow.
And somewhere in my papers, I still got the letter from Dr. Handy saying you have done an outstanding job and you ought to be commended. And I appreciate very much in detail how you responded to every question that was raised to you. I can tell you, and I guess as a transparency is in order. If you really want to know the story, when I got back after my conversation with Dr. Cone, I actually called the professor who was the hardest on me in the defense and said, I want to make sure that I clearly understand all of your concerns, that I might faithfully respond to you. And then I indicated to him some of the ways that I was going to respond. And it's very interesting because what he said over the phone was very different from the defense. Over the phone, he said, he didn't call. He said, Mr. Kinney, you have really done a good work here. And I was just pushing you to make it better from my perspective. And so I wish to commend you and I thank you for this phone call. That was instructive for my life too. And it taught me lessons about sometimes in what appears to be a power struggle, you have the power to de-escalate the moment.
Right.
By demonstrating how you respond and act in the struggle.
Right. Oh,
I've often used that to teach lessons theologically and to even use it as a pastor. Never allow what comes at you to determine what comes from you. Because when what's coming at you can dictate what comes from you, what's coming at you is now in you, and you are no different than that which is coming at you. But to be your true self, let what's in you determine what comes from you, not what's coming at you.
And that's good for students because students don't always know what the professor or the educator has to face or even what's going on from their perspective. So I think that that's great. But my second question is, because I don't think I ever knew this. What was your dissertation topic? Or what was your project?
Dissertation topic was on the life and theology of Adam Clayton Powell Jr. and Adam Clayton Powell Sr., the theological and historical development of persons and a congregation in the urbanization period.
That makes total sense. I remember learning about both of them in Dr. Bond's class, Black Religious Leaders. I think in my senior year. Oh, okay. I'm learning a lot. Okay,
and it was. Can I just say that experience was very instructive for me because I look at the characteristics of an elder and a younger, the differences in styles, their struggle, and then try to analyze what are the unifying faith principles to even encounter what they went through and their experiences, not just with racism, but even with the church. The struggles that they dealt with, even with their ideas, concepts in the church, and how the dynamics of this and the powerful story. And that's when I used to talk about 12 hours a day, because one of the research pieces I used was newspapers. And at that time, the Schomburg collection in New York City had, well, they were literally on then microfiche. You had to get the rolls out of the box and put them on the screen and scroll them. Every day I would just go through reading the black newspapers, because the black newspapers, church was big news. And so I analyzed what they were, the issues that were in churches, the sermons they preached, how they understood the struggles, and even some of the conflicts they had with each other. But the amazing thing was, once you start doing that, there was so much information, it deflected you into all kind of areas that you begin to look. Because see, when the papers I looked at it, even begin to talk about the writers in the Harlem Renaissance, not they see what they wrote, but you saw stories of their lives. So and so said this, and there's this issue, and they'll be over. And it was an amazing experience for me. Really, in some ways, kind of solidified something that was emerging in me, because I ran across something called Radicals and Conservatives, written by Kelly Miller. And that it talked about, at some point, you have to be a pragmatic harmonizer. There has to be somebody who take the disparate ends and try to bring them together for a productive and positive purpose. So it was, I still look back on those moments and those times with fond memories. Even with all of the demands, I can look back now and say I would do some things differently, because even at that time, I had so many things going on in my life. While I was in New York City, I got on the staff of a church. I coached a football team.
Oh, wow. With the family.
With a family, and was still trying to work on a PhD. Then I became the tutor assistant for the theological department. So that meant grading papers. I even had to do some lectures at union. So there are just so many things, and you're working on all these things. One of the normative patterns in PhD studies, when you're in a PhD program study, you think you're smart. And somehow you represent the elite. But now, as I look back on my life, wisdom and growth always reveal to you how ignorant you were when you thought you were so smart.
I definitely, yeah, that's good. I definitely see that, particularly with teaching first year students and trying to get them to, like, I know that they can't see from my perspective, but to give them the hope to say, what you're learning is good for you. I promise you. Even if it doesn't make sense now and you feel like it's repetitive, I've been there, and I'm giving you all that I have. To transition a little bit, let's talk about genius or purpose. So I got the idea of genius from my pastor, when I had my children's theater program, we did a little tour, and I brought them to my church, and he responded at the end of the performance, "Thank you for sharing your genius with us." And so I was like, ooh, I like that. I'm going to use that. So we're moving to that section. So for you, Dr. Kinney, what would you say is your genius or your purpose?
And in some ways, those two, the words genius and purpose, converge for me, because your genius will never become fully manifest, embodied, and expressed until you are fully walking in your purpose.
I receive, yeah.
And in some ways, there's no peace in you. You may do well with levels of satisfaction, but your full joy never comes to fruition, because you're not walking in a purpose and passion that just lets your genius flow. And when the genius flow, it's not work, it's being.
Right. Right.
It's not work. It's being who I am and what I'm called to be. And for me, I recognize now that my purpose was teaching.
Can identify
You
that.
understand? I had no desires to administer or direct, but I wanted to teach.
Interesting. Okay.
Um, I wanted to teach, and I love teaching, and I enjoyed teaching, and I I blossomed in some ways when I began to learn more meaningfully how to teach or to find my own niche in the teaching arena, uh, because I had always been, even though in my baccalaureate program, I did student teaching and took teaching methods as a part of it. My degree
Really?
was in comprehensive social studies, but I minored in education, so I taught high school. Yeah,
What?
I
Oh,
taught
wow.
Huntington High School in Huntington, West Virginia, for a semester, and I did, and I joined, and it was primarily social studies. But one of the things I discovered that I was always getting information, but no one was guiding me in how to teach.
Right.
And I learned teaching. My teaching model emerged just by being with students, and then beginning to understand how students sometimes were not responding to my teaching, not because of the information, but the way I was modeling before them,
Right.
and the way that I was creating an environment that created freedom in the learning process. And the other thing is that that happened to me when I did become a dean. Now that's 30 years ago, over 30 years ago, okay, when I first stepped into that office and served for 27 years, I got into teaching methodology by raising a question about who were the people we were teaching.
That's a good question.
Who are these people?
That's a good question.
What are their needs? And then I start doing continuing education on adult learning. That the people I'm teaching are adults.
Right.
And we're not treating them like they're adults.
Right.
And I had this little sheet. I didn't develop it, but I combined a lot of things from my reading. There's simple things like that adult learners want learning that is applicative. They don't want esoteric stuff.
Right.
You have to show the meaning and import of this in the practice of your life and your profession. The other, guess what? I guess what else I find out? Adult learners want to be where they feel appreciated,
Yes.
and they will go will bypass, go around, huh? If they ever experience a place where they feel like, you know what, I'm valued here.
Right.
Now the other key thing for adults, guess what else is affordable.
Right. Right.
And so as a leader, I begin to think is how do you make this affordable? How do you develop resources? And you even there have to look at a comparison with other institutions, and you have to do analysis of what is once you get to this degree, what's your earning power, and is the cost of the degree consistent with the earning power that will be generated once you get it, or am I educating you to be in poverty for the rest of your life because you're trying to pay for an education that is not positioned you to gain greater income? These are real things, particularly for those who are in ministry. But I begin to raise all these questions. But in the process, I begin to see, you know what, we've got to look at how we structure our educational process in light of who we're educating. And I did a whole lot of talk about becoming learner and student centered, and immediately it creates, because we tend to think hierarchically, The minute that you affirm the value of somebody else, there's some other folk who think they're being devalued. And I had a focus of, first of all, valuing students and also valuing staff that are sometimes treated like the mules rather than the persons essential for our work. And and it's so. But guess what happened? As you well know, we experienced an amazing flourishing. At that time, we did not even have a designated recruiter. Guess who the recruiters were? When we first started, guess who the recruiters were? The students. The faculty. But other students would be bringing you, hey, you need to be a part of this. You need to be here. So, as you well know, we grew from less than 100 students to over 400 students.
Yeah, I was there. We were so packed in those classes.
Yeah. That, that we begin to talk about how do we manage the flourishing?
Right.
Yeah. Because it was an environment that people wanted to study in.
Right.
Both by the character of the content, but also by the character of the care for the student. And you know what it took me back to?
Wow.
Going to those all Black schools as a child.
I can only imagine.
My teachers were so demanding, but I knew they cared about me.
Right. That's a difference.
Oh my God, goodness. I thought about that. And at this point in my life, I am feeling the hugs of a third grade teacher who literally, how her embrace, she said some of the hardest things to me. I remember her saying something to me like, in those Black schools, you were never called by your first name.
Really?
Yeah. When I was growing up, my teacher, they would say, Mr. Kinney, Miss So-and-so.
Even in elementary school?
In elementary school. Wow. And she said to me, Mr. Kinney, now let me see if I can help you make some sense of this. And I remember that.
Right.
But I also remember one time of being hurt and how I felt her care, or how she would care for us and teach us about life. And some of those things have carried me throughout my life. And so, part of it, as I say, even with adult learners, I discovered care still matters.
Right.
It influenced significantly how I've gone about what I'm doing. And it's also influenced me as a pastor. They don't need to hear me talk about some profound concept. Right. But every time I preach, they know that I'm going to be teaching too. They're going to learn. They're going to hear. They're going to be wrestling with a concept. But the value of the relationship is that they know I care.
Right. Right.
And so, it's been very, very meaningful, and I've come to recognize I'm not going to defend it or apologize for being authentically who I am.
No, that's right.
And not to allow other folk to engender levels of either guilt or self-negation because you don't do it like somebody else, because that's the way you're supposed to do it. It amazes me that we're always so outcome focused.
Right.
But we evaluate people based on their conformance to an existing normative system rather than beauty and the magnificence of the outcome they have helped create.
Right. You're right. And that moves us to our next question. Well, this could be two-part probably. But how did you discover your purpose? And how was that purpose or genius confirmed in your life? Because I think with a lot of young people, myself included, a lot of people in general, a lot of times people can get a sense of their purpose, but they're not sure, like, how do they discover it? How do they hone in? How do they know, okay, this is my purpose? How did you discover it?
Yeah. One of the things that I would say that it is a process. And rarely is it immediate. You have a sense Like I say, I wanted to teach. I wasn't even going to get a PhD. I went to
Really?
seminary and I assumed I was going to become a pastor, or I
Mm-hmm.
had some other job opportunities with nonprofits. It was my professors
Wow.
who said, and I'll name there are two people. Actually, there are three people that really influenced me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Miles Jones, John Malchus Ellison,
Okay.
who was the first African American president. And at the time that I was at Virginia Union, he taught preaching.
Mm-hmm.
And the other was really my theology professor, who was not Black. It was
Was it
Jerry.
Dr. Solon?
No, Dr. Solon taught me biblical studies, and he was a great, and he was a wonderful, wonderful spirit too. But Jerry Boney taught theology,
Mm.
and in his classes, he would even say to me, he called me Kinney, this is you.
Mm.
I said, what do you mean? He says, you light up with this stuff. This is you. Have you considered doing further study?
Wow.
That wasn't in my mind.
Mm.
Then Miles Jones was, because Miles Jones always asked the questions that made you think further.
I've heard.
Yeah, he didn't let you settle in the simplistic. And he wouldn't give you direct answers. He'd always put it back on you and push you to
Mm-hmm.
move and think further. His favorite phrase, you have helped us now.
Mm-hmm.
But John Malchus Ellison, and then at that time I'm talking about he's in his 90s. I'm
Wow.
trying to figure out how old. When I used to have conversations with him, I actually sat with him, and it reminds me. I got some stuff here now I need to get digitized. I've got maybe 4 hours of tape sitting with him, asking him questions. And
Wow, that was like pre-podcast.
there you go. And I actually wrote a piece talking about him and even why our convocation was named after him. But I sat and talked. He talked to me, and he said again. He would say, "Mr. Kinney, what are your plans?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to see where the Lord is calling me and what how my ministry might find expression." And he said, "That is noble and wonderful. That's noble and wonderful, young man. But can I suggest that I see something else for you?"
Wow. Talk
And
about
of course,
mentorship.
I'm doing deference. He's and I said, yes, sir. What? He said, pastoring is a noble cause, but pastoring, even for those of us who are called, is not the only cause we can be called to.
That's good.
And so he said to me, I think you ought to. Have you ever considered PhD studies?
Mm.
And I said, yeah, that's been in the back of mine. And he said, I just want to suggest to you, and I wish you would just prayerfully consider that he didn't say purpose, there is a cause that you need to invest in, young man. And I want to tell you now, I will do everything I can to support you
Wow.
and help make that happen. And then the balls start rolling. And Jerry Boney was, the one who began to talk about theology. And that's how it ended up. So it is a process. But can I tell you something, Tanya? I did not get clear about my purpose until I went where I didn't belong.
Yes, you feel that. Yes, I know the feeling. Yep.
And let me tell you this. There was nothing wrong with where I was. I had a wonderful experience where I was. And I would recommend it in there. And I guess there's nothing wrong. I left Virginia Union and went to Chicago Theological Seminary to teach theology. It was a wonderful experience. I enjoyed it. But there was something deep in my spirit.
Right.
Can I tell you what? In the spirit said this, because I was doing very well there.
Mm-hmm.
Students loved to come to my classes. We're talking, and I was just beginning to find myself. And I'll some of the things that my interchange and how I firmly believe that teaching is dialogical, that the students teach you. And every year I'm a better teacher because of the students that I taught. the, and I begin to see and dream and feel. Um, but I also recognize something in my core. And here's a message that came to me. Do you now see that you can succeed in places like this and do extremely well? So I don't want, and it's almost like I don't want you to be somewhere like you're a missionary and like you're making a sacrifice. I want you to be there because you recognize this is where you belong. When I talked to Miles Jones and talked to him about leaving, and I was making all these judgments and stuff, can I tell you what Miles Jones said to me? He said, John, if you do not want to be here, please don't trouble us with your presence.
Wow.
And he didn't say that in mean. That was the way he was truly trying to say something. Right. When you are where you don't want to be, you more or less become a negative presence.
Right.
Come on, the spirit around you does not radiate the fullness of the presence. And I said, well, I want to be here, but he said, no, get rid of the but.
Right.
When the but is gone, then be where there is no but.
Right.
And he spoke that to me before I left. And while I was away, I began to see something clearly about not only what I was called to, but where and how I was to live into that calling. And it's not easy. I think particularly for young people, even someone like you, even when you're going through this, you're still questioning yourself.
Right.
You still say, yeah, but maybe I shouldn't. And if I think about my career, or if I think about my income, if I think about this and all these other things, which are absolutely legitimate, but then you come to a point, and I say this, for me, there's you come to a point where I had to say to God, I'm available to you. I'm talking about ministry. Or what? Here I am, send you. You also come to a point in relation to your purpose. Whatever higher power you affirm, that you literally have to say yes to a purpose. I surrender all, and I'm willing to walk in the risks, the uncertainties, the doubts, and the fears, because I know this is what I'm called to do and be. And so I came back, and I didn't have to come back to Virginia Union, but I knew it was a setting like Virginia Union, where I was purposed to be. And so now, as I look back on my life, I've made some mistakes, and anybody who has not made mistakes has not lived.
I agree. We all make mistakes.
That's right. Or you're in denial. You have enshrined your failures as legitimate. Can I tell you something? It's like this country.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about.
We're going through stages of development. And rather than acknowledging that in our development, we have made some egregious errors.
Right.
No, we take our moments in our development where we were not at our best and build statues such that they establish the legitimacy for our future.
Right.
And that's tragic. Because rather than being, great again, we become the worst that we've been.
Right.
Yeah. So I think, when I think about us as a nation experiencing our own arrested development, I think that is I feel that very personally. And I'm at the stage in my life now where I wish I had the resources to retire in absolute comfort and not worry about anything. If I would have done this, I would have done that. I should have done it. I shouldn't have done that. But guess what? I am at great peace simply because I can say every step of the way, I tried to be faithful. Another way of putting that is I went through the process in such a way that I wanted to honor my purpose.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah. Sometimes it takes the people around you, but I had to leave and go somewhere else. And it's not that something was wrong with somewhere else.
I'm feeling that right now, right?
And I will sing, I will affirm, I will celebrate my experience there. I will always honor the friendships that I developed there, the growth that took place there. But it was not where I was, can I say this, destined to be.
Right, right. It's so funny that you say that because one thing that I used to teach, well, I don't do it as much now because it's kind of hard to translate that online, is students do personal narratives. And I used to show a clip from The Lion King, really a nod to systematic too, where, Mufasa's in the clouds and Simba feels like he can't go back. And then Mufasa tells him, like, you got to go back. Like, this is your purpose. Like, you've been in that space for so long. And so I think, even with Simba being in what I call Hakuna Matata land, he was developing and growing in the wilderness and all of those things. And he could have stayed there.
Yeah.
But it was for something else for him to do. And I think particularly for high achieving students, like, if you know how to work the system, you will succeed everywhere, whatever that looks like.
Yep.
But you're right, because the feeling, it feels different when it's time for you to shift, because it's hard to explain that to people when you have all these accolades and success. And I'm going through that right now. And it's hard to explain to people that despite this, I know that in my soul that God has something else.
Yeah. And, Tanya, I appreciate that so much, because what I discovered, even after I came back to where I belonged, I did not fully step into my purpose.
That's good.
And I had moments, even while I was being successful where I was led to be, I had moments that stretched me to another understanding. And, I don't, because I'm transparent now, I can look back now where I went through a personal period of what might be called depression.
Mental health is so important. I love my therapist.
Simply because even though almost everything I touched was turning to gold, there was something deep in my center that recognized something was disordered. And you know what I discovered? I got where I was meant to be, but in some ways I was still trying to design myself in a fashion other than the self that I am. The right place, but still not the right person. So there was a continued growth, and I just celebrate that. And now, I dream and wish for that for students as I see them developing, because when you begin to see deeply, so much of their success is driven by a quest for meaning that can't be answered by their success.
Yeah.
So in their success, they're still burdened with failure.
I understand that. First of all, I want to thank you for even mentioning depression. But I appreciate you sharing that, because I think, coming from my perspective, like, you're a giant. Like, when you said that you would say yes to this interview, I cried. I was like, oh my gosh. I called my sister. I was like, can't believe that Dean Kinney would say yes, because you've meant so much to me. But for you to share that you too have struggled with your mental health, I've struggled with my mental health. A lot of people have struggled with their mental health. For you to be able to admit that on a podcast um, is going to set some people free, to be able to say, maybe I need to talk to someone.
Yeah. And, Tanya, I almost believe that it's just like what I read years about burnout. Guess what it said? Burnout is a disease of the competent and the committed.
Makes sense.
Do you understand? And it talked about the different ways the burnout could manifest itself in some very negative behaviors. And, I'm just reading, but then I begin to think how you're stretched and you have visions, you live with a vision, you live with a level of accountability and discipline, and there is a sense, and I in some ways for me, I'm just speaking this around, that if you're honest with God, you're going to go through some valley moments. And if you're honest with God, if and I'm going into the pastoral mode, if you read scripture, anybody who ever fully lived into their purpose, there will be stories of them having moments of depression and even telling God, take my life, or you take this and shove it. I'm tired of this. I don't want this. And all of this is created by the very thing that you're committed to. Sometimes that you have to step back, or you have to have people in your lives. Not only may you may need a therapist, but you at least need therapeutic moments and presences where you are conscious of the fact this is a moment that I need to keep me whole.
Right.
And so I can't imagine anybody operating with absolute integrity and passion of purpose and commitment without having moments where you might say, look, this is too much for me. Okay, y'all, just, And the other thing that I've discovered is that when you live with passion, purpose, integrity, and commitment, that no matter how many people you have around you affirming you, there may be still a sense of isolation in your soul. You feel like you're all by yourself. And it takes a moment, like Elijah, where God has to speak in a still small voice.
Right.
And say, look, I got 600 just like you. You just continue to do what you do, and what you don't do, I got some brother partners have to. And if you need a moment, maybe you need to get some of them together and y'all just talk about the journey.
Right.
Yeah. So I think, I can affirm, celebrate, and appreciate people who have reached the point that they recognize that really living fully into purpose not only brings you joy, but it also can lead to moments that require you to walk through the valley.
Thank you for that. Before we get to the fun section, I just have one more question. Mm-hmm. So you balance a lot, and you mentioned your, how you did so much with your doctoral studies and how you balance a lot. But what now, currently, what are your self-care routines? Like, what do you do to decompress with all that you have in your schedule?
Work in my yard. And guess what? It's not even a great, beautiful yard. Just put my hands in the dirt, plant some flowers, plant some vegetables. If I can go rake my yard, if I can go, say I'm going to do this, those things are therapeutic for me. The other thing is I love to go to the mountains and I love to go to the ocean. I love to spend moments where I can just be in the hills. And I'm not someone who has to do a whole lot. I'm not one of those, let's schedule this, let's schedule that. No, just let me see, let me look, let me sense, let me feel, let me interpret. So I decompress. And I got to tell you something. My family is an important part of decompression, particularly my grandchildren. When they say something that just or do something, that makes my head spin and say, my God, how deep that is. I have to write something now. I committed to write something on the possibility that there may be a new translation of the Bible that says, will not say in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. It'll say when God created the heavens and the earth. And what would be the theological significance and import of taking out in the beginning and saying when?
Right.
And I made some jottings. I hope to do that next week. But one time I was working on something. My grandchildren were here for the summer. And I told them, I think I said that I was going to take them to go-kart racing, right? I'm going to take you. And they kept saying, well, when are you going to do that, Papa? And I said, when I finish this.
Mm-hmm.
Every now and then they would come back and say, is it when yet?
Mm.
And here I overheard a conversation, and the conversation was this. One of the younger ones said, when is when?
Mm.
And the older one said, when Papa says so.
Wow.
Now I'm talking about the significance of saying when God created, of actually not putting it in a time frame,
Right.
but in the sovereignty and the authority of Papa.
Right. Mm. That's good.
So they refresh me. Life refreshes me, and I have to acknowledge, I pastor, and I give a lot to that.
Mm-hmm.
But the people I'm privileged to be in fellowship with, they give so much to me. They give so much that refreshes and nourishes my life.
That's great.
And I'm going to be honest, Tanya, because I teach theology and I'm always dealing with theological stuff and ideas and concepts and experiencing and engaging life. If I would have had another career, I'd have probably been a medical doctor. I love science,
I can see that.
I love the healing, the healing service. There are times at this stage in my life that I'll even say, is it worth it? Did it make a difference? Was it really worth it? And it seems like every time I raise a question like that, there will be a Tanya that comes along and says, I just want to remind you of how you touched my life.
Absolutely.
So what it does, it causes you to see you're doing is not just where there's some product where you can say, okay, listen, but the product is not just from your hand. You didn't perform surgery, but you redeemed a life.
Yeah.
You empowered living. And so in a very real sense, many may not understand what you're doing has done. And whenever you begin to question it yourself, there is a droplet from life and eternity that reminds you that your doing has not been in vain.
Absolutely. Yeah. So now to the fun section. So I don't know if you listen to hip hop, so I was like, let me do movies. But I'm asking everyone in no particular order, what are your 5 favorite movies of all time?
Yeah. Well, look, let me just tell you this. Yeah, I do listen to hip hop.
Okay.
But I don't know the artist.
Okay.
And my grandkids keep me up on hip hop. They always say they'll send me something on my phone. Say, listen to this, Papa. There's some of this stuff I can't believe what folk are singing. I even used it in my Bible study last night. I made reference to a song and look about what happens when you begin to celebrate your own objectification. And I looked at some of the lyrics in hip hop, but the flip side was, if you listen to it closely, you also see almost like the blues, a deep analysis of the pain. You will also hear a hope and a God message sprinkled in there that oftentimes appears as a critique of the church, and actually it's a cry to the church. But I listen, but I can't tell you who. I can't tell you. I know that DMX just passed away, and uh, I know his story, and I'm old school, with Biggie, and,
Okay.
and the group, the back in that day, even when LL Cool J was rapping
Okay.
and stuff.
Okay.
I think about some of those things, and I even compose my own little raps. That I'll sprinkle into my preaching for theology.
What?
I just don't. I didn't just not put the beats. Okay, let me give you an example of one of my favorite
Okay.
ones. When I'm trying to teach young people to not allow their circumstance to reduce them to be defined by their reality, rather than the identity that is God given. Your situation and your location and somebody's interpretation that leads to negation is not the basis of your identification, because your identification is in your creation, not your situation, location, and interpretation and negation. And once you claim a relation with the source of your creation, there's no situation, location, interpretation, and education that can place a limitation on your elevation, your destination, and your authentication.
Yes. MC.
So
Kinney.
you put.
I love
I'm
it.
trying to get my one of my grandson who's into all that. I said, why don't y'all? Can you put some of this to beat and have a lesson? Uh, and as I'll go back to like Mahalia Jackson's, why she would never sing the blues. They tried to get her, and boy, she would have been great. But her response always was, the blues let you know what the problem and the pain is. I want to sing the songs of the hope and the promise. So I choose.
Mm.
She had amazing offers with, I mean, in terms of the inducements for her to sing blues, and she refused every time.
Wow.
And she said the reason, because my songs will be songs of hope, not statements of the pain. Interesting. Now, so I look at hip hop. I've had some students who've done theological analysis of hip hop and done very, very well. But you see, you name one of my favorite movies, The Lion.
Lion. Okay.
Concept of the circle of life, and it's fundamental to what I teach about theology, about how you bring death to a community.
I'm gonna
That
have to look at that again.
Yeah, yeah, because you have elements that want to be in the superior position of control. And the circle of life is broken by a quest for power and position that establishes a hierarchy of value. Oh, that movie is amazing. See, you got to realize that people say, well, those are children. Why do children's movies affect you? Because they have such a deep, what are considered to be the G movies. But another movie that I love, the people, Homicide, Color Purple,
Mm.
movies like that. And then people will think I'm crazy because, now whenever my daughter comes home,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to watch the movie version, or the video version of the live presentation of Hamilton.
Okay.
What a
Hamilton.
powerful, powerful, powerful lesson, man. Hamilton. Not only are the performances great, but if you just listen to the deeper questions of meaning. I just wrote the introduction to a book, and I ended it with the two questions of Hamilton. The first question is, when your time is up,
Yeah, I love that song.
right?
Who will
And
tell
the
the
other one
story?
is, who will tell your story?
Story. Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's the introduction to a biography where one of our heroes tells his story. Those two questions, but there's one that people will always criticize. Do you know what movies I love to watch?
What?
Naked Gun. Crazy, just sometimes simple nonsense.
Yes,
They make
I
I
love those
I
series.
crazy, crazy movie. More recently, just a few days ago, I watched what, Judas and the Black Messiah.
Yeah,
That was a kind of a painful
it was.
to look at that. And what I thought about is the genius in so many young Black people that gets murdered, that just gets murdered. And when I start thinking about murder, I don't just think about the way you were killed in a hail of bullets. I think about the way that we keep murdering the beautiful gifts that surround us. And that it does give you levels of grief that when you just see. I even look at our school systems.
Yeah,
Then you
especially
read,
our kids. Yeah.
yeah, and you read reports and things. I watch some of my own grandchildren, and see, I'm blessed to have a montage of grandchildren who have entered life in all kind of circumstances and situations, and um, all kind of stuff, and I look at some of their struggles, and I look at the way that our educational system consistently fails them. Um, and I don't necessarily just want to point a finger at the educational system, but no, when I say that, I look at the ways that sometimes I consistently fail them. We all are not served, doing the things. So every now and then when I can get them all together for something, we watch a movie together. And so Lord knows what we'll be watching. But one of the consistent ways that we had family was to go see a movie. And I like, all genres, from the animated stories to the deep dramas to the just downright nonsense. I'm
Mm-hmm.
always trying to see what I see.
Right. Right. For me, I'll go briefly. I love Barry Gordy's The Last Dragon.
Oh yeah,
I just the gold glow and show enough, and I preached
yeah,
about that, and that the master we're looking for is in us. Then Coming to America. I love Coming to America. Now the
oh,
second one
thank
was
you. Yeah, I got you. Oh yeah, I love that too. I should have mentioned that. You made me think of another one that I love. You know what
which
is
one?
Avatar?
I didn't even yes. I didn't think about
Oh
yes. That's a great movie.
yeah.
Mm.
So that one too. Yeah, but there's
And then
so many out there.
Hey, so this is Tanya from 2023. I had to punch in this part of the audio because the audio was distorted. But basically, I am talking about my top 5 movies, or the movies that I enjoy. And they include Bebe's Kids, because for me, as I've gotten older, it is a critique on how society views single Black women, and how society, or really society's perspective on what they deem is a lot of children. Then we had Class Act. I love Kid and Play. And of course, The Lion King, for all the aforementioned reasons earlier in the episode.
Yeah,
yeah, but this has been great. Again, I appreciate the interview conversation. I appreciate I do want to say thank you for even my time back at Union. I don't even know if you remember before I taught back at Union, you told me to write down a list of all the
yeah,
things that I wanted to do. And I'm
yeah,
excited to say that although all those things didn't happen at Union, a lot of those things I was able to do, especially recently guest editing um, the collection on Black protests with the Journal of American Folklore. And like one of
okay.
my lists was to have a magazine to really think about theology. And so I appreciate even when I left Union and came back and left and I was so afraid because I was like, oh my gosh, am I gonna be alienated from my community and my
Yeah,
family? I'm grateful
yeah.
that that wasn't so,
Oh
and
no,
I want to thank you for that.
and I want to thank you um, for you, and I want to thank you for the gifts that you have made uh, to the life of your school, not only as a student but coming back to be a part of the instructional team and in the various ways. And in a very real sense, how you help me and us be faithful to opening the door. You don't open the door for people to fail. When you open the door, you do the necessary things to make sure that you are partner with them in fulfillment. And I want to thank you for being a partner in that. Okay?
I appreciate that.
All right.